The transit shuttle from Vrath station to Cathara Holding ran twice a week, on 3rd day and 6th day. And it was not a comfortable ride. It was a cargo shuttle repurposed for personnel, which meant the seating was bolted to the inside of a crate rack. The lighting was institutional yellow, and the entire fuselage smelled of machine oil and the particular sour metallic odor that holding facilities always seem to produce, even when they're several 100,000 kilometers away. I had been on it for 9 hours. The first 3 hours I had kept my eyes on my authorization forms and read them again until I had memorized them. The next 3 I had looked at the small porthole in the fuselage wall and watched the dark between transits, which is not empty but appears that way. The last 3 I had slept badly, in the way that you sleep when you are trying to pretend you are asleep and your body knows the difference. I was 16 years old, and I had a duffel bag with a change of clothes, an authorization form I'd had to fill out in triplicate, and a laminated visitor pass with my name spelled incorrectly. The pass said Vrath, which was close but not right, and I'd thought about mentioning it at the check-in desk on Vrath, and then decided it didn't matter. I was only going to be there for 6 hours. You don't argue about the spelling of your name for a 6-hour visit. My father's name had been Vrath. He'd been a pack handler for 15 years, 12 of them with the Vrath, and he had never once complained that his name was spelled wrong on any official document. He filled out the forms. He turned in the logs. He attended the quarterly assessments and sat through the lectures about protocol and acceptable proximity limits and what to do if a Vrath showed lateral crest rise in a confined space. He attended all of them. He agreed with the instructors in the room and did things his own way when he got back to the pens. I know this because he told me to know it, because I went with him to the holding station 6 times as a child, twice when I was small enough that I mostly remember the smell and the sound, and 4 times between the ages of 10 and 14, when I was old enough to understand what I was seeing. What I was seeing was my father, who was a large, quiet man with calloused hands and a bad knee from an equipment fall when I was 3, walking into a pen of 6 wolf-shaped predators, each the size of a transport mule, and talking to them in a low voice as if he were describing the weather. He was the only person they'd ever allowed inside without a restraint harness. My father's quietness was a specific kind. It was not the quietness of someone who had nothing to say. He had things to say. He was careful about which things and when. He was the kind of man who, when you asked him a question he considered important, would take a long time before answering, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to give you the accurate version rather than the quick version. He told me once, when I was 12 and we were on the shuttle back from one of those visits, that the hardest thing about working with the Vrath was not the danger. It was the patience. He said the Vrath existed on a different time scale than most interactions he'd been trained for. They didn't hurry their assessments. They didn't give you preliminary results and then refine them later. They made their decision completely, or they didn't make it at all. And if you pushed the pace, what you got was not a partial decision, but a hostile one. I had thought about that a lot in the past 11 months. The patience and the complete decision. He died 11 months ago. A systems failure in the outer pen corridor. A hydraulic door that was supposed to lock at 70% capacity locked at 40 instead. And when it shunted back open under pressure, it hit him in the back. He didn't die from the impact. He died from the fall, and from the specific geometry of a man with a bad knee on a wet deck. The accident investigation summary concluded it was a maintenance failure and rated it a Category 3 incident. His name was in the final report for 3 paragraphs. The rest of the report was about the hydraulic door and its maintenance history and the scheduling gap that had allowed the fault to persist. And in a technical sense, the report was thorough and accurate. And in the sense that my father had been a person, it said nothing at all. The Vrath had not accepted a handler since. I had not asked to go back to Cathara Holding. Not for 11 months. I'd thought about it every day. But thinking about a thing and deciding to do it are different operations. and for a long time they stayed separate. I was living with my father's sister, who was a kind woman with 2 children of her own and not enough room, and a way of looking at me sometimes as if she was adding something up and not liking the total. I was enrolled in a technical certification program that would take 2 years and produce maintenance credential, which had been the practical thing to arrange after the accident. Because practical was what you reached for when other things have stopped being available. The technical certification program was not interesting to me. I completed the modules because the alternative was to not complete them and have no credential. And the alternative to the alternative was to have a plan, and I did not have a plan. What finally moved me was a message from the station's administrative office. A form letter, routed to next of kin, notifying me that the holding contract for pack designation Vrath 7 had been flagged for non-renewal. It cited 3 handler incidents in the past 11 months, none of which had resulted in fatalities, but 2 of which had required medical extraction. It cited the pack's refusal to accept feeding from station staff without a full containment procedure. It cited the pack's compliance index, which had dropped from 94% under my father to somewhere around 31%, and which continued to trend downward. The form letter told me the non-renewal decision would be finalized in approximately 14 days. It offered me, as next of kin of the last bonded handler, the option to visit the facility before that date. It noted that my visit would have no bearing on the administrative outcome. It was very clear on this point. I read the form letter 4 times. Then I filled out the visitor forms, got the pass printed incorrectly, and took the 3rd-day shuttle. I spent the 9 hours on the shuttle doing something I had not done in 11 months, which was thinking about the Vrath directly, not around the edges of the thought, which was how I'd been managing. Thinking about my father and letting the Vrath exist at the perimeter of that, present but not examined. I was thinking about the Vrath themselves, the 6 of them, what they would be doing now, what 11 months of non-renewal process and declining compliance index and automated feeding protocols looked like from inside the pen. My father had told me that the Vrath have a very clear sense of territory, not in the aggressive, expansionist way, not the way some predators mark and defend, more like a cartography. They know their space precisely. They know what moves through it and what doesn't. And when something that has been a constant presence becomes an absence, that absence is registered as a change in the map. My father had said that when a bonded pack loses its handler, the behavioral disruption is not grief, the way humans use the word. It is closer to a navigation error. They know where the person is supposed to be. The person is not there. The map is wrong, and the pack cannot correct it. 31% compliance index, declining. 3 handlers, 2 injuries. The pack had been trying to correct the map. None of the people who came to the corridor fit the shape the map said should be there. I looked out the porthole at the dark between stations and thought about being a shape that didn't fit. Fleet Administrator Sovith Aaron met me in the receiving bay. She was a Kethavari, a species that runs about 2 meters tall, with smooth gray-green skin, a narrow face, and eyes that reflect light the way a cat's do, meaning that in the overhead yellow of the receiving bay, she looked like she was lit from inside. She was perhaps 40 years old by hegemony standard reckoning, which put her in early middle age for her species. And she wore a station administrator's jacket with the collar pinned tight and an expression that said she had agreed to meet me because the regulations required it, not because she thought it was useful. She looked at my pass. She said, "Fen Orith." "Orith," I said. "There's an H." She looked at me for a moment and then looked at the pass again, as if confirming to herself that I was correct about my own name, and then looked at me again. "You're 16, she said. "Yes. Your father was Davin Orith." She said his name like she was reading it from a document, which she possibly was. Yes, he held the bonding designation for Vrath 7, pack of 6, adult pack, not cubs. The bond was established when the pack was at juvenile stage, which was 14 years ago. She paused. "You were 2 years old when the bond was established." "I know." The pack's current compliance index is 31% and declining. 3 of our experienced handlers have logged contact incidents in the past 11 months. 2 required medical extraction. She said this carefully, as if she wanted me to hear the weight of the number. 2 people had been hurt. She was making sure I understood that. We have a decommission authorization from Sector Animal Management on file. The facility has the authority to proceed. The reason we have not yet proceeded is administrative, not because there is any ambiguity about the pack's disposition. I understood the word decommission. I had understood it when I read the form letter, and I understood it now. She was telling me clearly and professionally that she was going to have 6 animals killed, and that my visit was a courtesy, not a consultation. I understand, I said. She looked at me. There was something in her face that I couldn't read, not unkindness, but something like wariness, like she was trying to figure out if I understood what I was walking into. She had the look of someone who had expected a grieving adult and had been given a teenager, and was recalibrating. The pack has been confined to Pen Block C since the 3rd handler incident, she said. We maintain visual contact via remote sensors. We provide food by automated dispense. We do not send staff into the pen corridor. She paused. I want to be clear about that. We do not send staff into the pen corridor because the pack's behavior is unpredictable and has been since your father's death. I know, I said. You are requesting access to Pen Block C. Yes. She looked at the authorization form I had submitted. She looked at it for a while. It was in order. I had been careful about that. The triplicate was complete. The waivers were signed. The next of kin designation was properly certified. I had spent an evening making sure everything was in order, because I had learned from my father that if the paperwork was right, the people who had to approve it ran out of reasons to refuse. She said, your authorization is valid. You have visitor clearance, next of kin status, and a waiver on file. I am not legally required to prevent you from entering Pen Block C. She paused. I am professionally required to advise you that the 3 handlers who sustained injuries were experienced adult personnel with full containment, training, and that the pack did not respond to any known de-escalation protocol. I understand, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She was looking at my hands. I noticed her looking, because I was my father's son, and I had inherited his habit of noticing what people look at when they are trying to figure something out. My hands were wide through the palm and thick-knuckled, and the knuckles were calloused in the way that hands get calloused from tool work, because I had been doing maintenance certification modules for 11 months, and the lab components involved a lot of equipment. She was looking at my hands the way people look at something that doesn't fit the category they've been using. I'm going to assign you a safety escort to the pen corridor entrance, she said. The escort will not be entering the corridor with you. They will be at the corridor entrance with a containment kit and an emergency extraction signal. She said that in a tone that suggested she was aware of how insufficient this was and was doing it anyway because it was what procedure allowed her to do. That's fine, I said. She held the visitor pass for another moment, looking at me. She had the look of someone who had run out of things to say, which was not a comfortable expression on a facility administrator. Her safety escort was a young Kethavari male named Orsit, who was perhaps 20 years old and had the particular manner of someone who had been briefed extensively on what they were supposed to do and was not certain any of it applied. He had a containment kit on his belt, a signal device in his hand, and an expression that went somewhere between professional concern and barely contained alarm. He walked me down 3 corridors and a maintenance stairway, and then through a heavy pressure door to the pen level, and the smell hit me before we were through the door. The Vrath have a scent that is hard to describe if you've never spent time around them. It is not unpleasant exactly. It is animal and heavy and carries something under it that is like ozone or like the smell before a storm, sharp and clean and a little electric. My father used to say it was the smell of a predator that had decided not to kill anything yet, and that if it changed, you would know before your brain knew because your body would respond first. I had not smelled it in 11 months, and it landed on me now like a sound heard through a wall, something known, coming back through material that had seemed solid. I stopped for a moment at the pressure door. Orset looked at me. He said nothing. I said, "I'm fine," which I was. I just needed a second. He nodded and walked on, and I followed him through. Orset stopped at the corridor entrance. He pointed to the signal device clipped to my jacket, which he had attached there without asking and which I had not objected to. "If anything changes," he said, "meaning if the pack makes a move toward you, you hit the blue button. I will have the door open in 30 seconds. "Okay," I said. "The pack is in the inner pen. You'll have to walk the outer corridor to the mesh barrier. They can see through the mesh." He paused. "They can hear through it too. They can smell you well before you reach it." "I know," I said. He looked at me. He was maybe 4 years older than me, and at this moment he looked much younger, because he was looking at me the way people look at someone they expect to be afraid and who isn't. And he was trying to understand the gap. "Your father was the one who—" "Yes," I said. He stopped. Then he said, "He was. Everyone here said he was good with them. He was." I said. I walked into the pen corridor alone. It was a long corridor, about 40 meters, with riveted steel walls and overhead panels that threw a flat white light that pressed every shadow flat. Along the left side was the mesh barrier, heavy gauge, 2 centimeters between wire, set in a reinforced frame and anchored at floor and ceiling. The barrier ran the length of the corridor. On the other side of it was the inner pen, which was a larger space, perhaps 20 meters deep and the full 40 meters long, with a raked floor and elevated sections, and the particular quality of stillness that happens when living things are quiet on purpose rather than absent. I walked 6 steps in before I saw them. They were at the back of the inner pen, all 6. They were arranged in a loose grouping that was not quite a formation, but also not random, the way a pack arranges itself when it is awake and watching. The largest of them was the alpha female, whom my father had called Anchor, because she was the fixed point everything else organized around. She was 4 meters long at the shoulder when she stood fully upright, though she was lying down now, her enormous head resting on her forelegs, her eyes reflecting the overhead light as flat gold discs. Beside her, and slightly behind, were the 2 elder males, broader through the chest than the females, their spine ridges folded flat, and their posture the compressed stillness of predators at rest. The 3 younger ones were arranged further back, not hiding, just deferred, the way the younger members of a Vrath pack always defer to the elders in a still watch configuration. They were watching me. They had been watching me since I stepped through the door. I knew this because Anchor's eyes had not moved from the moment I could see her, and the elder males had shifted, very slightly, in the way that large animals shift when something changes in a room. And now were watching me too. 6 sets of flat gold eyes in the white light of the pen, unblinking, all aimed at the doorway where I was standing. I walked to the mesh. I stopped about a meter from it, which was approximately where my father used to stop in the initial approach. You did not press to the mesh. You stopped and you let them decide. He had told me this when I was 10, standing beside him in this exact corridor, and I had not understood then why you would stop and wait when you were the one who had come to visit. He had said that the Vrath don't understand the concept of appointment. They understand persistence. You either are in front of them or you are not, and the decision about what they do with that is theirs, not yours. And if you go to the mesh and press your face against it and stick your fingers through because you want to pet them, you have made that decision for them, and they do not like having decisions made for them. I stopped a meter away. I put my hands at my sides. I waited. The flat white light was loud. That is a strange thing to say about light, but institutional lighting in a steel corridor is a specific kind of loud. It flattens everything. It eliminates shadow. It makes the space feel slightly more hostile than it is. My father always said the corridor lighting was the wrong choice for a Vrath pen block. He'd said they preferred ambient to overhead direct, that the overhead washed out the visual information in their peripheral field, in a way that made them slightly more reactive. He had submitted a maintenance note about it twice. Neither note had been acted on. Anchor lifted her head. She did not move her body. She lifted her head from her forelegs and extended her neck slightly, and she was looking at me the way I had seen her look at my father a dozen times, not with aggression, not with curiosity exactly, but with the particular quality of attention that apex predators give to things they are in the process of deciding about. Her nostril ridge widened. She was scenting the air. I am not a large person. I was 16, and I had not yet finished growing, and I was thin in the way that boys who forget to eat are thin, which is to say unevenly and without intent. I was wearing a plain work jacket and station-issue boots, and I had my father's hands, wide through the palm, thick-knuckled, which was perhaps the only physical feature I had inherited from him with any clarity. I looked nothing like a handler. I looked like what I was, which was a young person who had come a long way to see something he was going to lose. Anchor stood up. She rose from lying down to fully upright in one movement, the way the Vrath do, not in stages but all at once, unfolding like something that had been compressed and now wasn't. She was 4 meters at the shoulder, and when she stood, the space behind the mesh changed character entirely. She moved toward the barrier. She covered the 20 meters of pen floor in a way that was not quite slow and not quite fast, but that had an inexorability to it that I had forgotten, or that I had been too young to register properly as a child. The floor vibrated. I felt it through my boot soles. I heard Orset make a sound behind me at the corridor entrance. I did not turn around. Anchor came to the mesh and stopped with her muzzle touching the wire. She was close enough that I could see the individual scales of her snout, which were dark charcoal with pale edges, like embers that had gone mostly cold. Her eyes were the color of old gold, not bright, not metallic, but warm and dense and very still. She was looking at my face. At this distance, I could see that the gold of her eyes had a darker ring at the outer edge, which I did not remember from my visits as a child, or which I had not been close enough to see before. Her eyes were about 20 centimeters in diameter at this scale, and they were entirely and without reservation focused on me. She scented the air again. Her nostril ridge worked slowly, methodically. This went on for a while. I stood with my hands at my sides and did not move, and she breathed in, and after a time I heard faintly a sound that I had not heard in 11 months, a deep subsonic resonance that was less a sound than a vibration in the chest. The thing that Vrath produce when they are not alarmed, when something in front of them has registered as known and not threat. My father had called it a settle. It was not a purr, and it was not a growl. It was the sound of a very large predator taking its foot off a threshold it had been standing on. The elder male on her left, my father had called him Raft because he was the steadiest of the pack, rose from his position and came to the mesh as, well, not to the same place as Anchor. He came to a different section, perhaps 3 meters to her left, and he did the same thing she had done, stood with his muzzle close to the wire and scented the air. After a moment, the low resonance from Anchor deepened, and Raft added his own. The two frequencies were close, but not identical, and together they made something that felt like warmth in the lower back. 2 of the younger ones came forward, not to the mesh yet, just closer. I understood, with something that was not thought exactly, but was the kind of understanding that arrives whole, that they were smelling my father in me. I don't know the mechanics of it. I know that Vrath scent recognition is extremely fine-grained, that they can distinguish between related individuals in a way that most species cannot, and that the bond my father had carried with them for 12 years was a chemical and behavioral reality, not a metaphor. They were not seeing a ghost. They were identifying something that was close to what they knew, close enough to carry the same markers, and they were deciding what to do with that. I was close enough to the mesh that I could have reached out and touched Anchor's muzzle through the wire. I didn't. I kept my hands at my sides. My father had a thing, he said. He didn't say it every visit. He said it when the pack was settling. when the initial still watch had resolved and the energy in the pen had shifted from assessing to accepting. He'd say it in a low, flat voice, not commanding, not warm exactly, just the sound of someone stating a fact. He'd say, "Stay close." It wasn't an order. Or it was an order, but not the kind that demanded obedience through authority. It was the kind that the Vrath responded to because it told them what configuration to assume, and the configuration was close and calm and present. My father had said it was the most useful thing he had ever learned about working with them, that what they responded to was not dominance and not submission but clarity. The pack didn't want to be commanded. They wanted to know where the person was going and whether they were going together. Stay close was both of those things at once. It said, "I know where I am. You can be near it," I said. "Stay close." My voice was not steady. I did not mean for it to be unsteady, and I was surprised that it was. I had said the words in my father's flat, low tone, and they had come out with something in them that his version never had. A kind of crack in the middle that I couldn't help. I was 16 years old, and my father had been dead for 11 months, and I was standing in a corridor that smelled like him in front of his pack, and I had just said the last 2 words he would have said to them before he walked in, and my voice had done something I hadn't planned for. Anchor pressed her nose through the mesh wire and touched my hand. It was not a push. It was not a demand. It was the specific gesture that the Vrath make when they are registering a bond. The flat of the muzzle to the hand, not the nose tip, but the broader plane of it, the way my father had described it to me. He'd said it was the equivalent of a formal introduction in their social language, which was to say, it was the thing that happened after you had already been decided about, and the decision had been yes. I turned my hand over. I pressed my palm flat against the outside of the mesh, between the wire squares, and Anchor's muzzle rested against it. She was warm. I had forgotten how warm they ran. All that mass, all that engine, and they run warm like something with a furnace at its center. I could feel her breathing through my palm and through the wire, the slow depth of it, the unhurried rhythm of an animal that has put its threshold down. Vrath extended his neck and placed his muzzle against the mesh near my shoulder. The 2 younger ones came fully to the mesh now, not at the section where Anchor and Vrath were standing, but at a new section further along. And they did what the others had done, the slow scenting and then the settled resonance. The 6th member of the pack, one of the elder females, gray-muzzled in a way that spoke of real age, came last. She moved slowly, with the measured deliberateness of a very old animal that has decided something important, and she came to the mesh near my right side, and she stood there without touching it and looked at me for a long time. I looked back. She had been with my father since she was a juvenile, 12 years. If Vrath's lifespan ran the way the literature suggested, she might have another 12 ahead of her. She was looking at me with old gold eyes in a face that was built for killing things, and she was deciding something. I did not know what. I stood still and let her decide. After a time, she lowered her head and pressed the flat of her muzzle against the mesh. I heard Orset behind me saying something into his comm. His voice was controlled but had a particular quality to it. The quality of someone relaying information that they could not quite believe. I did not look back. Fleet Administrator Sovith Aaron arrived at the corridor entrance 8 minutes later. I know the time because the corridor had a clock display on the far wall, and I had been watching it without meaning to. The way you watch clocks when everything else you might look at is either too much or not enough. She stood in the entrance with Orset at her shoulder, and she looked down the corridor at me. I had moved to the mesh. I was standing with my hands through the wire. Fingers, not palms, because the mesh squares allowed fingers and not palms, and Anchor's muzzle was resting against my fingers from the other side. Vrath was at the mesh to my left, the gray-muzzled elder female, whose name I had not known until today because my father had not given her a call sign, and I did not have one ready yet, was at the mesh to my right. The 3 younger ones were ranged behind them inside the pen in a loose half-circle, all facing toward me, all still. I heard Aran say quietly to Orset, "When did they come to the mesh?" Orsett said, 3 minutes after he entered the corridor. "The alpha female first." There was a pause. Aran said, "Compliance behavior?" Orsett said, "They initiated contact." He didn't approach the mesh. He stopped at standard distance, waited, and they came to him. A pause. The settled vocalization started about 40 seconds after the alpha female scented him. It's been continuous since. I heard Aran make a sound that was not quite a word. I kept my fingers through the mesh. Anchor was warm. My father had been right that you could feel the warmth through the wire. He had told me that once, and I had thought it was the kind of thing you say when you are trying to describe something to a child. A small detail to make it feel real. It was a real detail. It was the warmest thing I had felt in 11 months. Aran walked down the corridor. She stopped several meters behind me and to the side, at a distance that did not crowd the moment but brought her close enough to see it clearly. I heard her breathing change, a slight adjustment that I recognized from other people, in other situations, when something they expected to understand had turned out not to be what they expected. She said, "Fen." "Yes," I said. "What did you say to them?" I thought about this. The same thing my father always said. There was a pause. "Stay close," she said it, as if confirming. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "That's in the handler logs. Your father used it as a pack address call. The logs describe the pack response as..." She stopped. "As what?" I said. "As immediate compliance posture across all members," she said. "Every time, without exception." She was quiet for a moment. "The 3 handlers who attempted contact with the pack after your father's death also reviewed the logs. 2 of them attempted the address call." I turned my head slightly, not all the way. "Did it work?" "No," she said. "The pack showed escalated aggression toward both." I thought about that. It wasn't hard to understand. The Vrath didn't respond to the words. They responded to the person saying the words. And I was not the same as my father. I was not a handler. I was not trained. I was not an adult. I was a thin 16-year-old with calloused hands and a bad shuttle seat still in my back. But I carried something that the words, coming from the other 2 people, had not. I didn't know exactly what it was. Scent, maybe, the way the elder female had decided in that slow, considered way. Something about the silence before the words. Something about the hands. Something about the particular quality of staying still that my father had put into me over years of showing me and not explaining, the way you put things into people without meaning to, just by doing them in front of them often enough. My father had never explained to me how to earn what he had with them. He had shown me, over years and visits, the proximity and the patience and the low, flat voice and the stopped distance before the mesh. He had shown me the turned over hand. He had shown me that you waited for them to decide, and that you did not try to make the decision for them, and that the decision, when it came, was clear and not ambiguous. He had not explained why it worked. I think he did not know why it worked, not exactly. I think he believed it had to do with the fact that he was not afraid of them, and that the not afraid was genuine rather than performed, and that the Vrath were old enough and sophisticated enough to know the difference. I was afraid of them. I should be honest about that. I had been afraid walking down the corridor. I was not afraid of them killing me. That fear had been present and had been gone by the time Anchor stood up, replaced by something else. But I was afraid of them the way you are afraid of things that matter too much. Afraid of the weight of what was being offered, and whether I was capable of being the person it was being offered to. The gray-muzzled female pressed her muzzle more firmly against the mesh at my right side. Not hard, just present. I turned my hand over and pressed it against the wire by her face, the way I had done with Anchor. She was warm, too. I don't know how long I stood there. The clock on the wall was at a different position when I next looked at it, and Aran was still in the corridor behind me, and Orsett had not moved from the entrance. The pack had not moved. The settle continued. Vrath had pressed his spine ridge against the mesh at the level of my left shoulder, which I had not expected, and I had moved my left hand to that section of wire and felt the ridge under my fingers, flexible, slightly warm. the individual plates of it shifting slightly as he breathed. My father had told me the spine ridges were tactile organs as well as display organs, that the Vrath used them to communicate information about their emotional state to each other, and that when a pack member pressed a ridge against something it trusted, it was sharing its own state, not just tolerating contact. I did not know enough about Vrath behavior to know what state Raft was sharing, but the resonance was there, and the mesh was warm, and it had been 11 months since I had been anywhere near anything that had been near my father. At some point, Aran cleared her throat. She did it quietly as a signal rather than an interruption. I said, "I know, I have 6 hours. Actually," she said, and then stopped. I heard her adjust something in how she was standing. She said, "The 6-hour window was established on the assumption that you were visiting for personal closure before the decommission." She paused. The circumstances appeared to have changed somewhat. I looked at the clock. I had been in the corridor for 90 minutes. "What circumstances?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "The pack's compliance index has moved," she said. "Since your entry into the corridor, its current value is 100%. I didn't say anything. "That is the highest recorded figure since your father's death," she said. "It is, in fact, the highest recorded figure in the last 14 months. Another pause. The last time it read 100% was the last recorded handler contact before your father's accident. I heard Orsit say something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words. Aran said, "I am not in a position to proceed with a decommission during an active compliance event. The sector protocols for decommission require a minimum of 48 hours of stable non-compliance behavior as a prerequisite." She said this as if reading from a document, which she possibly was. "The current compliance status does not meet that prerequisite," I said. "So what does that mean?" she said. "It means the decommission timeline is suspended pending a status review." She paused. "It also means that the facility has, by regulation, an obligation to explore alternative handler designation options before proceeding with decommission if a compliance event of this nature occurs during the notification window." I turned away from the mesh. Not all the way. I turned enough to look at her. She was looking at me with the Kethavari reflective eyes, both of them flat gold in the corridor light, and her expression had changed from the one it had been in the receiving bay. It was not a warmer expression exactly. It was a more careful one. She looked like someone who had come to the corridor expecting to watch a young person say goodbye to a dangerous animal, and had instead watched something she did not have a standard protocol for. "I'm 16, I said. "I'm aware," she said. "I don't have handler training. There is a provisional designation pathway for next of kin with documented behavioral history and pack compliance records," she said. "It requires supervised contact hours, a cognition and response evaluation, and a formal report from the facility administrator." She paused. "It was designed for cases in which a bonded handler's family member had extended documented contact history with the pack prior to the handler's death." She looked at me. "How many times did you visit this facility with your father?" I thought about it. 6 times, I said. "The last was when I was 14. "That is in the pack's contact records," she said. "Your father logged all family visits." Another pause. "All 6 of them include notation of the pack's behavioral response to your presence." I looked at her. "The notations describe a below-average threat posture profile during your visits compared to standard contact windows," she said. "Your father noted it. He was not someone who wrote extensive annotations in his logs, apparently, but he wrote that one." She said it in a flat voice, and it landed on me differently than she probably meant it to. Because my father, who had not written extensive annotations, had written that one, and that meant he had thought it mattered enough to write, and that meant he had seen this possibility, had seen something in the way the Vrath responded to me, and had put it in the record. He had been building something. I had not known he was building it, but he had been. I looked back at the mesh. Anchor had not moved. Raft had not moved. The gray-muzzled elder female had not moved. The settle continued, low and even and warm, coming through the wire and the floor and filling the corridor with the kind of sound that you don't notice as sound until you pay attention to it. I thought about my father. I thought about him the way I had been thinking about him for 11 months. Not with the sharp, bright pain of the early days, but with the particular quality that comes later, the thing where the loss has settled into the bedrock of you and you stop trying to get around it and start trying to understand how to move with it. He had been a large, quiet man with calloused hands, and he had spent 12 years coming here and doing what he did, and he had never explained to me why he did it or what he got from it, and I had never asked, in the way that you do not ask your parents about the things that are obviously central to them, because those things seem permanent, and you assume there will be time. There had not been time. I thought about what there was instead. There were the 6 visits and the corridor, and the settle sound and the warm muzzle through the mesh wire, and the 2 words he had said in a low, flat voice every time the pack had settled, and the moment had shifted from assessing to accepting. There were the calloused hands that had turned palm up at the mesh. There was the log notation, written by a man who did not write extensive annotations, about the way his pack responded to his son. There was everything he had shown me without explaining, and the explanation that I was apparently supposed to build myself from what I had been. Given I turned back to the mesh. Anchor was watching me. She had not moved. The old gold eyes in the charcoal face, and the scale edges like embers going cold, and the warmth coming through the wire. I don't know what I'm doing, I said. This was for her. Not for Aran, not for Orset. For her, because she had been deciding about me for 90 minutes and had made a decision, and that decision had been based on something real in me, something that had come from my father, and I thought she deserved to know that I was not pretending to be more than what I was. I was a 16-year-old who had come to say goodbye, and instead something else had happened, and I was going to need time to understand what I was supposed to do with it. Anchor made a sound. It was not the settle. It was different, shorter, with a particular quality at the end of it that I had heard once before. When I was 14, and I had said something to my father in the corridor, and he had laughed, and then she had made this sound, and my father had said, still laughing, that the Vrath had a sound for when a young member of the pack announced something obvious. He had said they used it to indicate that the information was received and appreciated, but not surprising. I did not know if that was what she meant, but it felt right. Aran was writing something on her handheld. She wrote for a moment, and then she stopped and she looked at what she'd written, and then she looked at me. The provisional pathway requires a minimum of 90 supervised contact hours over a period of not less than 60 days, she said. At the end of that period, the facility administrator files a recommendation with Sector Animal Management. If the recommendation is favorable, the provisional designation is formalized. She paused. The designation would require you to be present at this facility for a minimum of 3 days per month during the provisional period. I thought about the transit shuttle. 2 days to get here, a day on station, 2 days back. 3 times a month was 12 days of travel that I did not currently have the money for, and I was 16, and I was living with my father's sister in a mid-belt station apartment with 2 rooms, and I was enrolled in a technical certification program that had not told me what to do about any of this. Is the pack all right? I said, during the 60 days, while I'm not here. Aran looked at me. The automated feeding and maintenance schedule is sufficient for their physical needs, she said carefully. Their behavioral state during unsupervised periods has been. She stopped. It has been consistent with an unsupervised pack in a stable holding environment. That's not what I asked, I said. She was still quiet. I thought about the 31% compliance index. I thought about the 3 handlers. I thought about the navigation error, the map that couldn't correct itself. I can't do 60 days from a mid-belt station on a technical certification stipend, I said. I need to know if there's a residency option attached to the provisional pathway. Aran looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at her handheld. She scrolled. She stopped. The provisional pathway includes a handler residency provision for candidates under 18, she said. It provides facility housing, a training stipend at junior rate, and tuition transfer credit toward an animal management certification. She paused. The provision was included for cases in which the candidate has no independent resources. It is rarely used. She paused again. The last case that triggered it was approximately 20 years ago. Who triggered it? I said. She looked at me. She said, "Your father." There was a silence in the corridor. The settle continued. Anchor breathed. The clock on the wall moved forward another minute. I thought about my father at 16 in a corridor not so different from this one, in front of a pack that had decided about him. I thought about what it had cost him and what it had given him, and the 12 years he had spent coming back, and the calloused hands, and the bad knee from the fall when I was 3, and the quiet that surrounded him when he worked that was different from all other kinds of quiet. I thought about him filling out forms in triplicate and attending protocol briefings and writing the log entries, and in the margins of those entries, sometimes a single line in his flat, unelaborate hand. Something the pack had done, something he wanted to remember, something about me. I turned back to the mesh. Anchor was there, Raft was there, the gray-muzzled elder female was there. The 3 younger ones had moved closer, close enough to the mesh that I could see the individual structure of their shoulder blades. The way the spine ridges ran down the back of each one in patterns slightly different from each other. The way their scale edges caught the flat corridor light and held it in small pale lines. They were all looking at me, I said. "Stay close." I said it in my father's voice, or as close to my father's voice as mine would go, which was not very close because I was 16, and my voice had not finished doing what voices do at 16. But I said it in his cadence, flat and low and not commanding, just stating what I needed, just telling the pack where I was going and whether we were going together. And the pack answered, not with sound, or not only with sound. The settle deepened. It became something you felt in the sternum rather than heard, a low, sustained note that the walls took up and the floor took up and that I felt in my teeth. All 6 of them were against the mesh or close to it. 6 Alpha-class Vrath, each the size of a transport mule, the most capable large predators in the Cathara sector's animal management system. A pack that had injured 3 experienced handlers in 11 months and refused feeding protocols and made Fleet Administrator Soveth Aaron file a decommission authorization. They were standing at the mesh of the inner pen in a formation that I recognized without being able to name, a formation that meant something in their social language, a configuration that my father had described to me once in terms I had been too young to fully understand. He had said, when they do that, they're not choosing the space, they're choosing the person in it. I pressed both hands flat against the mesh. I had not been a person who was chosen before. I was not my father. I was thinner and younger and quieter in all the ways that were not useful and noisier in all the ways that were not planned. I was not trained and I was not ready, and I did not know the first thing about animal management certifications or junior stipend rates or tuition transfer credits. I knew that the gray-muzzled elder female had decided about me in a slow and careful way, and that Anchor had pressed her muzzle to my hand through the wire, and that Raft had let me touch the spine ridge that was an organ for sharing his state with things he trusted. I knew that my father had been 16 once, in a corridor like this one, and he had not been ready either. And I knew what he had done, which was to turn his hand over and wait, and to say what he needed to say in a low, flat voice, and to keep coming back. I could keep coming back. I could do that part. I had come this far on a form letter and a shuttle that smelled of machine oil, and I had walked a corridor by myself in front of a pack with a 31% compliance index and 2 injured handlers in its recent history, and I had said 2 words in an unsteady voice, and the pack had settled. I could keep coming back. I turned away from the mesh. Aran was watching me with the flat gold eyes and the careful expression. Orset was at the entrance with his hand still on the signal device, and he had the look of someone who had received a briefing about every possible thing and had just watched something the briefing had not covered. "I want to fill out the residency application," I said. Aran was quiet for a moment. She looked at her handheld. She looked at me. Then she said something that she probably did not mean to say, because it was not administrative language, and it did not match the tone she had been using since the receiving bay. She said, "He would have been glad you came." I didn't say anything. She recovered herself. She said, "I'll send for the forms." She did not say she would need to file the decommission report. She did not say she would need to submit the non-renewal notice to sector animal management. She did not say anything about the administrative outcome, which she had been very clear about in the receiving bay, and which she did not appear to be very clear about anymore. She tapped something on her handheld and looked at it for a long time, and then she said, "The forms will take an hour to process. You can wait in the staff reception area." I looked back at the mesh, at the pack arranged along it, all of them present, the settle still moving through the floor and the walls and the wire. "Can I wait here?" I said. Aaron looked at the pack. She looked at me. She looked at the clock. She said, "The 6-hour visitor window is still technically in effect." She paused. "I see no regulation that specifies where within the authorized access zone you have to spend it." I turned back to the mesh. Anchor was there. The pack was there. The settle was there. I sat down on the floor of the outer corridor, my back against the wall on the far side from the mesh. I put my hands in my lap. I was not close enough to touch the wire from where I was sitting. I was close enough that they could see me, close enough that the settle reached me. The elder female at the far end of the mesh lowered her head slowly, folded her spine ridge flat in the way that Vrath fold it when they are in a resting configuration, and lay down, her muzzle facing toward where I was sitting. The others followed her, one by one, until all 6 were lying down, all of them facing toward me, and the corridor held the pack's sound, and the pack's warmth, and the particular stillness that is not absence but presence without demand. I sat with them for the rest of the 6 hours. I did not say anything else. They did not do anything I could write in a log. When the forms arrived, Aran brought them herself. She came down the corridor quietly, looked at the pack, looked at me, and set the tablet on the floor beside me without comment. I signed where the form indicated. The pack did not move while I signed. When I finished, Aran picked up the tablet and looked at what I'd filled in, and then looked at the pack again, and then she looked at me. She said, "The residency room is on level 3. It was your father's room." She paused. "We left it as it was. We were not sure what to do with it." I said, "That's fine." She turned to go. She stopped. She said, without turning back, "The decommission authorization is suspended pending the provisional designation review. It will remain suspended as long as the provisional status is active." Another pause. "I will file the status update with sector animal management in the morning." She did not say what she would file instead of the decommission report. She did not say that she had come to this corridor prepared to watch a teenager say goodbye, and had instead watched something that did not fit neatly into any of her existing categories. She walked back to the corridor entrance. Orset followed her. The door sealed behind them. I sat in the corridor. The pack was there. The settle continued. Outside, in the corridor levels above, the station ran its machinery and its bureaucracy and its administrative procedures, and Fleet Administrator Sovith Aaron was, I suspected, staring at a form she had been certain she was going to file and was now not going to file, and was working out how to describe in official language a compliance event that had not been covered in the Sector Animal Management Handbook. A pack of 6 Alpha-class Vrath with a 6-month declining compliance trend and 2 medical extractions on record, and a 16-year-old with calloused hands and an incorrectly spelled visitor pass, and a number that had moved from 31 to 100 in the time it had taken him to walk 40 meters and say 2 words. I did not know what she would write. I knew what had happened, which was that I had come to say goodbye and had instead said stay close, and that the pack had answered in the only language they had, which was presence. My father had known this. He had known it at 16, in a corridor that might have been this corridor, and he had spent 12 years coming back, and he had left me, without meaning to, the only inheritance he had available, the way to hold still, and the way to turn over your hand, and the two words that meant I know where I am going, and you can come with me if you want. They had waited 1,100 days for those words. I was going to do my best not to make them wait anymore. Anchor's breathing slowed. The settle continued. The corridor was warm. I stayed until the light on the clock read the end of the 6-hour window, and then I gathered my duffel bag, and I said quietly, "Stay close," one more time, and the pack lifted their heads and watched me stand, and I walked to the corridor entrance, and I thought about my father's room on level 3, which had been left as it was, and which I was apparently going to learn to live inside the way you learn to live inside an inheritance, carefully, and with gratitude, and knowing you did not fully earn it, but that it is yours to carry now regardless. I had not expected to inherit his work. I had come to say goodbye. I was starting to understand that those two things are not always different, that sometimes saying goodbye is the door you walk through to arrive at what comes next. And what comes next is the thing the person you lost had been quietly building toward you for a long time, waiting for you to be ready to walk through it. I was not ready, but the pack had decided that was not the determining factor. I went to find the room on level 3.